What's going on? There's Iceman. Welcome back to this world. Welcome to welcome back to this world. Today we are going to fly the UH-1, the Huey. And we're going to do the training missions for the Huey. So let's do it. So cold start. This is also a practice starting the Huey from the ramp. Alright, that's a cool photo. Let's do it.
Welcome to the cold start lesson, Cadet. Today we will practice starting up the Huey and getting her ready for flight. Press the spacebar key when you are ready to begin.
Fuck yeah. Let's do it. Actually, you get a thumbnail first. Alright.
Before we begin, press right Control and C to close the cockpit doors.
Okay.
First, we need to provide electrical power to the aircraft. This can be done with the help of the ground crew, but we'll use onboard power. Take a look on the overhead console. On the AC power control panel, set the AC phase voltmeter selector switch to AC, and the inverter switch labeled INVTR to off.
Okay. Wow. Look at this cockpit, guys. This is pretty sweet. Here we got a helicopter starting up. Look at this helicopter, dude. We got him starting up. Fuck yeah. Nice. Oh shit, we got the helicopter. Look at that. That's cool. Right, so AC phase.
Now on the DC power control panel, set the main generator switch to on and the DC voltmeter selector switch to ESS bus, essential bus.
Okay. I'm going to do that.
Next, set the starter generator switch to start and turn on the battery.
Okay, battery.
Don't worry, that's
Oh
just the
shit.
low RPM warning blaring, which is normal right now. Press the low RPM audio switch to acknowledge the warning. Let's also test the caution lights panel to make sure all of the lights are operative. Set and hold the test switch in the down position. Make sure all of the caution lights are on. Next, on the engine control panel, set the main fuel switch to on and the governor switch to auto. All other fuel switches should be off.
Okay.
On the miscellaneous control panel, set the hydraulic control switch to on, the force trim switch to on, and make sure the chip detector system is set to both.
Okay.
Before starting the engine, we need to make sure the throttle is set to idle. The throttle is located on the grip of the collective control handle next to the pilot's left leg. The throttle is twisted left using the page up key to increase it, and right using the page down key to decrease it. Press and hold the page down key for a few seconds to make sure the throttle twist grip on the collective control handle is set to the idle stop position. Also, make sure the stick and pedals are in the neutral position and the collective is fully lowered. You can check the position of the controls on the controls indicator by pressing right control and enter. To start the engine, you will need to press and hold the home key on the keyboard to pull the engine start trigger located beneath the switch box of the collective control handle. As the engine spools up, you will need to monitor the engine instruments and the clock. The engine start button needs to be held down until the gas producer speed reaches 40% or 40 seconds have passed on the clock, whichever comes first. You should also see the rotor begin to turn around 15% of gas producer RPM. If this does not happen, abort the start sequence. Whenever you're ready, begin the ignition sequence by pressing and holding the home key on the keyboard to pull the engine start trigger. Don't forget to note the time and watch the gas producer indicator.
Oh shit. Here we go. Alright, so let's do it. Alright, let's start.
The helicopter will toss you around quite a bit as the rotor spins up. Let me know if you need to use the bag.
There we go.
Okay, we're idling normally. Let's set up the avionics. Back on the overhead console, turn on the inverter by setting it to main on. We'll now power up the radio systems. Set the AN-APX72 transponder to standby, STBY, by right-clicking once over the master switch. Turn on the AN-ARN82 VHF NavCom radio by right-clicking on the power switch once. Turn on the AN-ARC134 VHF com radio by right-clicking on the power switch once. Turn on the AN-ARC51VX UHF radio by setting the function switch to TR, transmit receive. Set the interphone selector switch to 3 to set the VHF com radio for transmission. This will allow you to communicate with ATC. To communicate with wingmen, you will usually transmit over the UHF radio, which is position 2 on this switch. Turn on the AN-ARC131 VHF FM radio by setting the mode switch to TR, transmit receive. Turn on the AN/ARN83 ADF receiver by setting the mode switch to ADF. To complete the avionics setup, set the starter generator to standby STBY on the overhead console. Let's now run up the engine to normal power. Press the page up key repeatedly and monitor the engine and rotor RPM indicator as power increases. Continue to slowly add power until the throttle grip on the collective is twisted all the way to the left. Watch the engine RPM to stabilize on 6600 and rotor RPM on 324.
Let's see what we look like outside. Fuck yeah, we're idling. Look at that. That's awesome. Alright, let's do it.
Right-click over the test switch on the master caution panel to reset the master caution light on the front dash. If the engine RPM is off the 6600 mark, you can use the governor RPM switch on the collective, also known as the beep switch, to adjust the RPM as necessary. The helicopter is now ready for takeoff. This concludes the cold start lesson. Well done.
Fuck yeah, dude. Hell yeah. The sound, man. Fucking awesome. Alright. Pickup demonstration. This is a video demonstration lesson overviewing the helicopter pickup from the ground to low altitude hover. Nice. Oh, it's a video.
Welcome to the pickup demonstration lesson. In this lesson, we will take the Huey off the ground and into a low-altitude hover and ground effect, IGE, to demonstrate the initial step of a takeoff and basic hover control. For this lesson, the helicopter is lightly loaded and the weather is ideal with no wind. Control requirements will vary with increased takeoff weight and will be more difficult in windy conditions. Use the controls indicator to monitor the position of the flight controls. Remember, the flight controls of a helicopter are almost never stationary in flight, in particular the cyclic and especially during a hover. When performing a takeoff, be prepared to constantly make fine adjustments to the controls. Let's take a look at the position of the flight controls. At mission start, the cyclic and pedals are neutralized in the center. The collective is in a fully down position. Unfortunately, the starting position of the controls isn't very useful for flight. The position of the controls for any particular flight regime, including a hover, depend on airspeed, altitude, aircraft weight, payload, weather, and other conditions. However, the approximate hover position of the controls will generally be with the cyclic back and left and the left pedal pressed in. I will now set my controls in the approximate hover position. Watch the positions of the cyclic and pedals on the controls indicator. Once your controls are set in the approximate hover position, begin to very slowly raise the collective. Do this slowly enough to give yourself time to counteract any movement you detect from the helicopter. Counter any roll and sliding tendency with very light opposite cyclic. Counter any nose yaw with very light opposite pedal. Pay attention to how the cyclic is used continuously to make fine adjustments in attitude, and the pedals are used to maintain heading. Find a visual reference point well ahead of the helicopter. This will help to maintain closer visual cues like the runway markings within your peripheral vision to help you detect movement. Allow the helicopter to settle at a desired altitude and let the collective rest in place. The helicopter hovers best near the ground, where ground effect acts like an air cushion below the helicopter. Ground effect is only present to an altitude of approximately half of the rotor's diameter, or about 24 feet. It is reduced as altitude increases. Climbing above this altitude will transition you out of ground effect, OGE, which demands more engine power to maintain. Hovering out of ground effect may be impossible with high takeoff weights or in hot, high conditions. When performing a takeoff, you will proceed with the transition to forward flight from a hover altitude of about 3 feet skid height. This concludes the pickup demonstration lesson.
Alright, takeoff demonstration. It's a video demonstration lesson overviewing the transition from a low altitude hover to forward flight as part of the UH takeoff procedure.
Welcome to the takeoff demonstration lesson. In this lesson, we will transition from a low altitude hover into forward flight to complete the takeoff. You should already be familiar with the pickup lesson and be able to take the helicopter off the ground and into a hover in ground effect, IGE. Use the controls indicator to monitor the position of the flight controls. One of the critical elements of this lesson is the change in the position of the controls seen as we pick up airspeed and transition the helicopter from a hover into forward flight. Pay attention to the position of the cyclic and pedals in the hover and how they are operated as we accelerate forward. As always, it's important to make sure your control inputs are smooth and continuous, giving you plenty of time to balance the helicopter and keep it flying where you want it to and not where it wants to fly you. I will now bring the helicopter to a low altitude hover as demonstrated in the pickup lesson. Take a note of the positions of the flight controls. To begin the transition to forward flight, dip the nose down very slightly with a little forward stick. As the helicopter begins to move forward, the lower pitch angle will result in a slight descent, requiring a slight increase of the collective at the same time. Your goal is to minimize climb until you reach a safe climbing speed of at least 30 knots. You also want to keep the skids aligned with your ground track in case you end up on the ground. Use the pedals to keep the slip ball centered to minimize side slip and the right instrument column to maintain heading. vibrations indicate that you are passing through effective translational lift, or ETL, which means you are flying fast enough to be ahead of your own turbulence and the rotors are becoming increasingly more efficient in the smooth air. This results in a tendency to balloon the helicopter upward, raising the nose up and yawing left. These tendencies need to be anticipated and compensated for by pushing the stick forward to prevent an early climb and decreasing left pedal input to maintain heading. Notice the position of the flight controls now as compared to the hover position we started with. The cyclic is much more forward and right, while the pedals are almost neutral. After reaching a safe climbing speed of at least 30 knots, you can proceed with a climb to your desired altitude at an airspeed that provides the best climb rate, which is generally between 60 to 80 knots. This concludes the takeoff demonstration lesson.
Alright, pick up and take off solo practice. The solo flight mission which you can practice the pick up and take off without help from the instructor. Alright. Here we go. Let's do it. A little bit of power. My cyclic over here. Let's give it a go. Whoa. Whoa, this is hard. This is real hard. Holy shit. It's not steady at all. There we go. Alright, let's go. Let's go for a takeoff. There we go. We did it. Alright. That was nice. Landing demonstration. It's a video demonstration lesson overviewing the approach to landing in the Huey.
Welcome to the landing demonstration lesson. In this lesson, we will overview an approach and landing in the Huey. As with fixed-wing aircraft, landing a helicopter is one of the more challenging aspects of any flight. Almost every landing in a helicopter is a unique experience, because the approach can vary greatly depending on helicopter weight and payload, wind, altitude of the landing area, obstacles, and other factors. Executing safe and effective approaches takes skill and practice. All of your landings will be visual, so you should always have a good mental picture of the landing area and plan an optimal approach. Ideally, the approach should be free of obstacles and directed into the wind. For training purposes, we will be landing on a clear runway in ideal weather. For a good practice approach, we'll start about a mile from the landing point at about 500 feet of altitude and 60 to 80 knots. Most runways in this area include an inner homing beacon about 1,200 meters from the threshold, and this makes for a good visual marker to line up for the approach. Unlike fixed-wing aircraft, helicopter approaches continually reduce airspeed in the descent toward the landing point. The approach is terminated with a hover over the landing point, or, if a hover cannot be performed, with a running landing directly onto the skids. The continual speed reduction during the approach causes significant control challenges. As you saw during takeoff, the helicopter exhibits a change in balance as airspeed varies, requiring constant adjustment on the controls. From a starting speed of 60 to 80 knots, deceleration will be gradual and control will be consistent and predictable down to approximately 40 knots. The collective will be reduced for the descent and pedal input will be minimal around the neutral position. The dynamics will start to change quickly below this speed as you begin to lose translational lift. The helicopter will start to sink and bleed energy quickly. You will need to increasingly raise the collective while adding corresponding left pedal input and adjusting the cyclic to maintain your approach path to the landing point. Your goal will be to maintain the descent until you enter a low altitude hover just above the landing point, after which you can perform a vertical landing to touch down. I will now begin our approach by lining up with the runway using the inner homing beacon as a visual marker. Our goal for this practice will be to land on the runway numbers. As you make the turn for the approach, slightly reduce collective and pull the cyclic slightly back to settle into a descent path at a rate of approximately 500 feet per minute. Watch the vertical velocity indicator to maintain the rate of descent and keep an eye on the airspeed indicator to monitor your airspeed. Once you're settled on the descent path, imagine a box on the canopy where the landing point is positioned and try to keep it there as you approach. This will help keep a straight descent path right down to the landing point, so all you have to worry about is controlling your airspeed and rate of descent on the approach. As airspeed drops below 50 knots, begin to make small increases on the collective and adding light left pedal as necessary to maintain heading. Stop the nose from pitching up by slightly easing off a little cyclic back pressure to prevent a rapid deceleration. I've marked the current position of the controls on the controls indicator so you can see how it changes by the time we enter the hover over the landing point. As you near the landing point, pull back on the cyclic slightly to raise the nose and gently come to a hover. Notice the copious amount of collective and left pedal required to maintain the approach. Once a stable hover over the landing point is achieved, begin to gently reduce collective and adjust pedal and cyclic as necessary to perform a vertical landing. This concludes the landing demonstration.
Alright, landing solo practice. Solo flight mission which you can practice the approach on landing without help from the instructor. Alright, let's do it. Where's the airport? Oh, there it is. Whoa. Going in slowly. Not bad. Tree there, careful. Whoa. Little rusty, little rusty. Little rusty. Oh, oh, oh. Careful, careful, careful. Easy, James. Easy. Easy. Easy, easy. Relax, Ice. Relax. You got this. So that's just minor movements, just like that. There you go. Minor movements. Straighten the nose a little. There you go. Now set her down gently. Set her down. Set her down. Set her down. There you go. Not bad at all. A little rusty on the end there, but it wasn't too bad. Alright. Not bad. Oops. Didn't mean to hit F10 there. Alright, weapons employment. This lesson will review and practice employing their weapon systems equipped on the Huey. Alright. Weapons.
Welcome to the weapons training lesson. In this lesson, we will review the weapon systems employed by the Huey and their associated cockpit controls. You will then have some live fire time on the target range. Press the spacebar key when you're ready to begin.
I'm not going to do any live fire time or anything like that. I just want to know the systems. Alright.
The Huey is equipped with the M21 and M23 armament subsystems. The M21 system utilizes 2 external hardpoint weapon stations on each side of the helicopter. These can be loaded with 7 or 19 tube launchers of 2.75-inch unguided rockets and M134 7.62mm 6-barrel high rate of fire machine guns attached on steerable mounts. The M23 system includes 2 traversable 7.62mm M60D machine guns operated by the door gunners on each side of the helicopter. You can press the F2 key to go to an external view of the helicopter and use the mouse to get a better view of the weapon systems. Press F1 to return to the cockpit view. Press the spacebar key to proceed. Rockets are aimed and fired by the right pilot using the M60 reflex sight. Rocket launchers are installed on fixed weapon stations, so aiming is accomplished by flying the helicopter to place the aiming pipper over the target. The M134 machine guns can be fired in either stow or flexible mode. In stow mode, the guns are fixed in the forward position and are operated by the pilot much like the rockets. In flexible mode, the left pilot uses the flexible M21 sighting station to aim the guns. This makes it possible to aim away from the helicopter's nose by physically moving the aiming sight to place the reticle over the target. The guns track the movement of the aiming station. If the operator aims too far to either side, only the inboard gun will fire to prevent striking the helicopter's own fuselage with the outboard gun. Press the spacebar key to proceed.
Alright.
The weapons are selected and prepared for fire using the Armament Control Panel and Intervalometer Control Panel on the central pedestal. The Armament Control Panel includes the Master Arm Switch and the Gun Selector Switch, which controls selection of the left, right, or both machine guns for fire. The Intervalometer Control Panel includes the Armament Selector Switch, which controls selection of the guns or rockets for fire, and the Rocket Pair Selector Switch, which sets the number of rocket pairs to be fired while the trigger switch is held down. This panel also includes the rocket reset and launcher jettison switches. Press the spacebar key to proceed. We'll now review the steps required to employ rockets. First, set the armament selector switch to 2.75 or press right alt and close bracket to select rockets for fire. Then set the number of rocket pairs you wish to fire while the trigger switch is held down. Because rockets induce a significant recoil and this is a practice mission, let's set this to 1 or press right control close bracket once. This setting will fire a single pair of rockets every time you squeeze the trigger. Set the master arm switch to safe or press right shift and close bracket once. This will allow us to see the aiming sight indication, but prevent accidental firing before we are safely airborne. Press the M key on the keyboard to turn on the aiming sight.
Okay.
You now have an aiming reticle projected forward of the helicopter. To employ rockets, you will fly the helicopter to place the aiming reticle over the target, stabilize your flight path to minimize side slip, and fire. Rockets are not very accurate and most effective against groups of soft targets at ranges of up to 2 kilometers. Accuracy increases as you get closer to the target, but so does the risk of being hit by return fire. As a general rule, you should turn away from the target immediately after the attack and avoid flying over the target whenever possible. Press the spacebar key to proceed. Now let's review the steps required to employ the M134 guns. First, set the armament selector switch to 7.62 or press right alt and open bracket to select the guns. Note that you can also choose to fire only the left or right gun using the gun selector switch on the armament control panel, but we'll keep both guns selected. The right pilot can fire the guns in stow mode, much like the rockets, by simply flying the helicopter to place the reticle over the target and firing. However, to make best use of the guns, let's switch to the left pilot position. Press 2 on the keyboard to jump into the left seat.
Alright.
You can now see the M21 sighting station display with the aiming reticle. With flexible mode on, the left pilot can slew the guns away from the straight ahead position and toward a desired target. To To try this, you can use the arrow keys on the keyboard numpad, the view controls on your joystick, or enable mouse look by pressing left alt and C on the keyboard and then use the mouse to control the direction of the sight. Practice controlling the sight until you are comfortable doing so, then return the sight to a forward position and press the M key on the keyboard to stow the sight away and disable flexible mode. It's important to note that when flexible mode is on and you're in the left pilot position, the AI pilot takes over helicopter control according to the selected autopilot mode. Refer to the aircraft documentation for an overview of available AI flight control commands. When the autopilot availability option is set to on in the UH-1H special options menu, the autopilot and weapons indicator can be toggled on and off by pressing left control, left shift, and H. AI flight control can be toggled on and off at any time by pressing left win and A. Now let's try door gunner position. Press 3 on the keyboard to take the right gunner's position. As with the M21 sighting station, you can aim the M60D machine guns using a number of view options, including the keyboard numpad, the joystick view controls, or by toggling mouse look mode with left alt C. Practice aiming the gun until you are comfortable doing so. Press the spacebar key to proceed. As with the left pilot position, the AI pilot takes over helicopter control when you take the door gunner's position. Once again, AI flight control can be toggled on and off at any time by pressing the left Windows key and A. Press 1 on the keyboard to switch back to the right pilot position. Let's select rockets for fire once again, as it will be our first weapon in the live fire exercise. Set the armament selector switch to the 2.75 position or press right alt and close bracket once. Remember, we've already set our rocket pair selector switch to 1. This concludes the overview of the weapon systems. You can proceed to do some ground attack runs on the target range, which is set up about 2 kilometers directly ahead. The target range includes a variety of stationary targets and a group of moving vehicles. Turn on the aiming sight by pressing M on the keyboard. Set the master arm switch to armed or press right shift and close bracket. Whenever you're ready, proceed with takeoff and climb out to about 400 feet of altitude as you head south toward the target range. Keep your airspeed below 80 knots to give yourself time to aim and operate the controls.
Alright. Alright guys, that's all for this part. If you'd like to smash like a button like a badass, leave a comment. I'll see you guys next time. Farewell.